All right, Joel Gausten here from joelgausten.com. If you're a regular viewer, in recent days, you know I've been battling some allergies up here in beautiful New England. Of course, the show does go on, especially when I have such a great guest. It's my pleasure to welcome from the Sisters of Mercy, Mr. Ben Christo. Ben, welcome.
It's so nice to be here, Joel. Thank you. And I hope you're feeling a bit better today.
I'm working on it. Last week was a nightmare, so it's getting a little better as time goes on. So we'll see how it goes for the next few minutes. But yeah, the sisters have been in the news a little bit lately, mainly involving your upcoming US tour. The band is coming back in September. You've got about 2 months worth of dates you're doing out here. And the band was out last year in the US, and I know that run was the first one you had done in about 14 years. So it was wonderful to have the band back here. And you're coming back again in just a few months. Um, uh, Out of curiosity, why did the band decide to come back so quickly?
Um, it was just so successful for us. I think it was just such an amazing tour. Um, Lots of really, really well attended shows, great energy around the tour. And I really feel like it was a case of let's sort of strike while the iron's hot. And we hadn't, and also the fact we hadn't played in there since 2008, which, as a side note, was not of any other particular reason than it's just a bit harder to coordinate touring in America for an English band than it is for Europe, just because of visas and flights and distances and things like that. Um, and everything just sort of came together in sort of 2022 in order for us to be able to come across and do the tour. So yeah, I guess just the idea of we had a great time. We're coming back. It's really 18 months later rather than it being a year, which is a decent amount of time for a touring cycle to come back round again.
And the band has a relatively new member in the ranks, Kai. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Correct. Yep.
And how did she become part of what's currently the Sisters of Mercy?
Kai is actually a man, and many people have because that Kai works with quite an androgynous look. Many people have during the shows said to me afterwards, who's this wonderful lady who's playing guitar? But Kai identifies as he, they, and Kai and I have known each other for quite a long time, maybe sort of 4 or 5 years. I met Kai on the London rock scene. I used to run a nightclub where we would, on a monthly basis, put on 3 hours of live music of covers of 80s bands. And Kai's such a great singer that and we both have a love of Cinderella's 80s stuff, the band Cinderella, like their 80s work, and particularly the Night Songs album. That I said to Kai, look, you've got to come up and do a song. And Kai did like an amazing Tom Kiefer, visually and sonically. And we did some Cinderella songs. So we met through that. And I just got the sense that as I was working with Kai, the work ethic that Kai maintains was something that I really felt inspired by and attached to as something that I recognized a lot of the things that I value in Kai's core values as well. So that was the initial meeting. And then after that, we started working together on some music. Kai sent me a track where he'd written the song musically, but needed a vocal line and some lyrics. So I put together, and Kai said, I love the way that you do it with your bands, with Diamond Black, what you've done with Night by Night. Can you do something in that style for this song? And I loved the music, and I recorded this, wrote the lyrics and recorded like a demo of what I thought the melody could be. And then Kai said, your voice sounds great on this. Let's do it as a duet. So that track was called Dead Zone, and it's still one of the tracks I'm the proudest of being a part of. Partially because it was written as I was just in the first stages of sobriety. So I've I'm in the process of overcoming alcoholism, and part of that journey started in September 2021 was the last time I had a drink. And Kai contacted me about this song about 3 months into that journey of sobriety when it was still very, very fresh. And so the song was written about from that vantage point of coming out of alcoholism and having these very, very vivid, clear memories of what it was like in the nadir of that alcoholism to then write about in the song. So the song is incredibly meaningful to me. And when we performed it live, because my band then toured with Esprit and Esprit d'Air, Kai's band, and part of the Esprit d'Air set was Kai would perform the song Dead Zone and get me to come up and guest as vocalist as per the record. And singing that song live was so emotional. And the very last show that we did in the UK on the last tour, we did it at the Garage in London, and I had never talked on stage about alcoholism. But that last show, it was sold out. The Garage must have been sort of 600 people. And I said, this song was a really important part for me in overcoming alcoholism. And I'm proud to say that I'm now 888 days sober. And I was really, really nervous about saying it on stage. But as soon as I said that, they took the roof off. It was I'm getting a bit emotional. It was really emotional to be able to say that live and to have that kind of incredibly positive response, because I was worried that if you say something, people are going to be like, what, you're holier than thou, if they're standing there holding drinks. But I tried to phrase it in a way that was just, if there's something you want to change about your life, it's never too late to do it. And that was the message. And as I said, they took the roof off, and I came off the stage afterwards, and I broke down crying, because it was so the catharsis of being able to publicly say, I have a problem with alcohol. I am an alcoholic. I'm working through alcoholism, and that positive affirmation coming back, and then performing a song about it. Not just talking about it, performing about it was really meaningful. So as you can see, that the connection Kai and I have very organically developed over the course of the last years, from let's just do some fun covers, to possibly one of the most memorable moments of my like live music career. Put it in a very good position that when it came up that we needed someone to play guitar for what initially was just, we just need someone to come and do this tour. Kai was very high on my list of people to call, and I did call another person before I called Kai, because that person had actually been in the running previously of the last time we auditioned. Mm-hmm. And that person, understandably, it's a big ask. You're saying, can you drop everything and come and do this tour tomorrow, essentially? And when and that person said to me, oh, let me think about it and get back to you. And a few days went by, and I wasn't really getting anything back. And then I called Kai, and Kai in the first phone call said, yes, I'll do it. And that sort of enthusiasm and can-do attitude was really powerful. And just the sense that Kai knew that whatever he had to do, he would figure it out. And he did. And then we did the first show in Würzburg in October. I think it's September, October.
Excellent. Well, first of all, my congratulations to you on your sobriety, ongoing. Not an easy thing to do. So fantastic to hear it's going well. And I certainly apologize to Kai for misgendering. I'm finding the temptation and obliterating the temptation to edit that part, because I believe in setting records straight. So I want to make sure that stays in there. But my apologies for unintentionally doing that. Let's talk about your entry into the band. I know you've been with the group now 18 years.
Correct.
And it's kind of an interesting story how you ended up in the band. As I understand it, you were working at a corner shop one day, and then 3 weeks later, you're in Vegas playing guitar for the Bloody Sisters of Mercy. How did you land on Andrew's radar?
I don't know. And I still don't know. I still don't know how they knew who I was and how he knew who I was. Because up until that point, my career had been very modest. Um, and you know, still is contextually, but I had been in a band called AKO, and we'd done a bunch of decent things. We in the UK, we'd released an album, we toured with some bands like Avenged Sevenfold, AFI, Stone Sour, Alkaline Trio, around the UK, you know, a handful of shows. And the last thing we did was South by Southwest, which was, you know, playing first of 7 bands in a tiny venue somewhere down the street. So I don't really know how he got hold of me. The only thing I had was I had a MySpace page where I had a couple of songs on there that I'd written and recorded, demoed myself, like done everything on the tracks. And then I don't know if you guys can remember, but with MySpace, you used to put down who your influences were. And there was a whole bunch of influences there. And one of those was the Sisters of Mercy, which at that point I'd erroneously written Sisters of Mercy, not the Sisters of Mercy. So fortunately, I must have been forgiven for that. And there was a link from the MySpace page, I think, to a musician's notice board where my phone number was. So that's the only way I think they could have possibly found me, was seeing, like, listening to the songs and seeing that I was into the Sisters, and then giving it a call. But I still don't really know, and I sort of like not knowing. It's quite on brand for the band, just the mystery. Um, so yeah, that was it. And I got a phone call one afternoon when I was preparing to go and work in the corner shop, and this mysterious voice that just said, didn't introduce himself, just said, "We're an internationally touring band. We're looking for a guitarist. We might want you to come and audition for us." So, well, what's the band? I'm not going to tell you. I was simply told the sound of it was like a combination of Motorhead and U2, and that, well, if I don't know what I'm auditioning for, what should I play? And he just goes, "Well, I'll just play some Hendrix licks." So I remember getting on this bus, the mega bus, which is the cheapest mode of transport that you can get in the UK. It's like £1 to go from city to city, and going up to the town that the band was based in, not knowing who it was or what it was, and being ushered into essentially just a room in someone's apartment where there was a bloke with a laptop, a bloke with a mohawk and a guitar, and a bloke sat on a sofa with a can of beer and some dark glasses on. And they just started playing some riffs. And I can't read music, but I can pick things up by ear. So if the guitarist would play something, I could fairly quickly pick it up and play it back. And I realize now in hindsight that the riffs they were playing were not recorded works, but works of the Sisters that they only play live. But even so, it still had a sonic and a melodic quality to it that made me think about the Sisters of Mercy. Such is the strength of the Sisters' sonic identity that I thought, this sounds a bit like the Sisters of Mercy, because I said I was already a fan. They weren't in my top 5 bands, but they were certainly in my top 15 bands. And so I thought, I'll just play a famous riff by the Sisters, and see if anybody says anything. So I just quickly played a track called Dr. Jeep, the opening riff to that. And the guy with the can of beer in the shades goes, "Oh, that's one of our songs." And I vividly remember that at that point, I looked down at my hands, and my hands were shaking, because not only was I in the presence of a band that I hugely admired, but there was a chance I might actually get to be in the band I hugely admired. And in hindsight, I'm actually quite grateful that they didn't tell me who it was, because I went into the audition with a sense of, I don't really care about this. I mean, I always care about doing my best, but there weren't really any stakes. Nothing was at stake, because I sort of was a bit skeptical about the whole thing anyway. The touring America won't tell me who they are. What is this? Um, and then I got a call a couple of days later, and they said, "Yeah, we think you might." Very British, very kind of like, "We think you might be the person who could possibly do this," rather than being like, "You're the guy." You know, it was very sort of underplayed. And I think the final little fun gem of this story is that I almost didn't get the job because I missed the phone call. They said, we're going to ring you at 2 o'clock tomorrow. Sure enough, they did. But for whatever reason, I was in the other room and I missed the call by like 30 seconds. Went back, saw that it was this area code. It's like, oh my God, I've missed the call. Instantly phoned them back. But it wasn't the call wasn't going through. It wasn't going to answer phone. It was going to fax machine. You're getting that sort of fax machine noise. Like, what have they done? Like redirected it to fax machine. So I went up to the there's like a computer store at the end of my road, Ritex Solutions, Kentish Town, and sent the only fax I ever have of my entire life that simply said, "Hi guys, it's Ben here, the guitarist. I'm so sorry I missed the call. I'm really interested. Please ring me back." And got this fax sent, and instantly my phone rang, and it was them. And it turned out later that that had saved me the job, because they were like, well, if he can't be bothered to answer the call, what else could he not be bothered to do when we're on the road if he's not reliable? But having lateral thinking and a bit of initiative to send them a fax was the thing that actually saved me. So again, Ritex Solutions, Kentish Town, thank you for letting me use your fax machine.
Fantastic. Like a lot of people, I grew up on those records. And I have a, fairly emotional relationship to that music. So as the band in recent years has been touring, inevitably I've been watching the YouTube videos to see how the band sounds. And first of all, I have to really commend you. Your guitar playing is exactly what I want to hear from the Sisters of Mercy, particularly on Alice. That was my litmus test. If you can do that, man, and you're really doing a stellar job in the group. As a fan, it's what I want to hear. That does lead me to a question, though, because I've known quite a few people who have gotten gigs like yours, who've joined an already well-established band with a history. And of course, with history comes expectations. For you, how have you been able to balance honoring what came before with the sisters and obviously bringing your own identity to it as an individual player and as a current contributor to the band?
Well, initially, very badly, because I came into the band for some reason, uh, feeling like it was a more metal than it really was. Now, my key album had been, for whatever reasons, had been Vision Thing, so that it was more of a hard rock edge that I felt like the band was. And so I came into it with that sort of a mindset of wanting it to be quite high gain guitars, and I was using quite a metal guitar, like a super strat sort of thing. And I also was overplaying. I was overplaying a lot, because it was a bit, I guess it was a bit kid in candy store of suddenly having this platform to play to thousands of people every night, which I never had before. And I felt like I had to, on every single song, show the full scope of my ability to justify my position, which meant sometimes overplaying, well, quite often overplaying, and adding little like flicks and tricks where they weren't necessary, because everybody must be able to see the full extent of my ability at all times, not recognizing that what was important was to actually just play the song. The various factors of align in that. But then after that first tour, I spent a fair amount of time with Andrew Eldritch, with him explaining to me about how he saw the Sisters of Mercy and any band as a machine in which every instrument has its place. And even if that's you just doing the same thing for 7 minutes, that's what's necessary to get you from A to B. As in a machine, a part in a machine can't suddenly just go off on one and do something else because it's bored. You've got to, in order to make the song happen, you have to do that. And he got me to listen to a lot of the Atlantic records. So, I mean, bands like Booker T, and so artists like Booker T and Sam and Dave and Al Green, these real classic records where it's so much about the rhythm and the groove and playing behind the beat and everything having its place and everything. And that taught me a lot about essentially playing for the song and recognizing that these songs are so important to people. There's so many emotional connections that people have to this music. And I personally believe that you're making a contract with the listener when they come to a show to represent that music to them in a way that is mostly what they're expecting, because they've got profound emotional connections to that music. And that's part of why they're coming to your show, is because of what those songs mean to them. So having that fidelity to the sound whilst still trying to make it an exciting event and not just a sort of heritage show, like a nostalgia show, of presenting that music in a way that is faithful yet still exciting and innovative, is quite challenging. And I certainly didn't get that right for many years. I feel now that we're the closest to it that we've ever been, certainly in my time in the band, of having that fidelity. And I'm really grateful to you for saying that about Alice, because in fact, Alice 93 was the first Sisters vinyl I ever bought. I bought the single of Under the Gun, and Alice 93 was the B-side. And so I that particular song is very important to me, and one of the first songs that I thought, this is incredible, this is amazing. And I appreciate you saying that, Joel, so thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been sounding fantastic. I can't wait for September, when the band hits Boston. It'll be my first Sisters gig. And what I'm really excited about, as much as I love the old stuff, everyone does, I'm very keen on hearing the newer material. And that's one thing that the Sisters has done quite a bit of in these recent tours, is you're incorporating a lot of new material, which kind of leads me to a long walk to a question, in that it's been since 1990 since Andrew and the band has put out a new album. Clearly, there's new material all the time. I would imagine back in 1990, not to speak for Andrew, but I would have to imagine there were some record label frustrations maybe leading to that decision by him not to do a new record. But we're in 2024 now. Obviously, we're in the era of crowdfunding, Bandcamp, what have you, more band centric and band driven technologies. Um, I'm wondering what you can tell me as far as perhaps the band's current mindset, as far as maybe utilizing where things are today to actually gift, the world with new Sisters music on record, let's say.
We're in the very fortunate position that not a lot of bands are, that we've already got a fan base. So there's already people there waiting to hear it if we were to ever release anything recorded. And that's one of the greatest challenges that any bands face, is how do I get anybody to listen to my song? So that alone is exciting, I think, certainly for me as a writer, or for the Sisters of Mercy. Is like, wow, if we did release something, a lot of people, it's certainly in terms of my musical reach over the years, of my other works, the kind of reach that I would get with the Sister song is much more considerable than anything that I've done hitherto by myself, with my own bands. So that's super exciting to know that those people are there, and that people would just find it. You wouldn't necessarily have to do a huge promotional campaign. You would just release it, and it would very quickly get shared around the world, I think, if it was good. Or even if it wasn't. God, you heard this? It's terrible. And that's empowering, that's exciting. And to know that we wouldn't have to be beholden to a label in order to do that. And I've never been signed to a big record label, like in my experience. It's always been quite like more kind of smaller kind of labels, where it's been a lot more of a kind of open dialogue about things. But I can imagine that for a lot of the bands that I loved from the 80s and 90s, that they were very beholden to the label saying, you're going to do this, this is this, you owe us this money. And so this is what's going to be on the front cover. But we wouldn't have to do that. We could do it the way that we wanted, having already got the fan base there. And it would just be a question of making sure that it was distributed properly, which I think would be fairly straightforward. So I think the idea of doing it is exciting. I think the idea of there being much fewer limitations and restrictions when it comes to how we want our work to be presented. I just wonder, and this is me just speculating about what Andrew's attitude might be towards the idea of that, is that we're already doing well-attended shows around the world. We're already writing new music. People are getting to listen to it. And in fact, one fan came up to me and after a show said, "Oh, I love new songs. I listen to them all the time." I said, What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I just make a YouTube playlist and I listen on my phone as I walk to college." And because the fidelity of the recordings due to, people's phones, basically, if someone's recording it at the show now, whereas 15 years ago, it was just like an unlistenable mush. Now the fidelity is pretty good. So you can hear the tunes, you can hear the lyrics. And someone who's of a younger generation, like this guy was, he was like 21, didn't ever really know anything else. So for him, yeah, just make a YouTube playlist and that sort of listening to it. Now, of course, as an artist, I'm like, well, I'd much rather that he was listening to the version that we had then curated, so everything was exactly where it should be sonically. But it's not bad, and as a sort of as an alternative. And often I'll look in the front few rows at recent shows, and when we play new songs, people know the words, people know how it goes, people cheer when it comes on, and that's great. That's just through listening on YouTube or maybe coming to a number of shows of that side of it too. And when it comes to playing new material at shows, again, as a musician, as a performer, I tend to feel that you have to be quite respectful about that. People have come because they want to hear certain works. At the same time, as the artist, it's your place to be able to present your works as well.
Mm.
And although the set that we do is quite 50-50, let's call it recorded and unrecorded works, I do feel that the unrecorded works still fulfill a contract of people's expectation of what they would like to hear from this band. So even though a song might come on and they don't know it, it still sounds like this band. It's a bit like, say you go and see a James Bond movie. Now, you've never seen it before, but as long as it fulfills all your expectations as a Bond film and has all those tropes and the gadgets and the villains, you're like, yeah, this is brilliant. Because it's the franchise you've gone to see. And I think as long as we can still produce music that adheres to our identity as a band while still pushing boundaries here and there of doing things a bit different, then I think that's still giving people a great show as well as the hits that they know and love.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that certainly leads to the point that, the Sisters is not a traditional band in many ways. Andrew does things Andrew's way. That always appears to have been the case from the beginning. And it's such an interesting case study because, number one, as mentioned before, it's been about 35 years since the last album. The first album is 40 years old next year. Andrew has done fewer and fewer interviews as the years have gone on. All of these things on paper are a recipe for irrelevance, but it's been the exact opposite with the Sisters, where you guys can take 14 years off from touring the States. You come back, there's immediately interest and fervor surrounding it. You're coming back in the fall. People are very excited. That's an incredibly rare thing for an artist who's not on social media every day, taking a picture of his lunch, or what have you. So I'm curious about, because obviously you've spent considerable time with Andrew. What makes him that artist who can do things in such an unconventional way, but still hold on to that level of interest that somebody would have to, publicly speaking, work 10 times harder to achieve?
I guess people love mystery. People love intrigue. People love not knowing sometimes. They love the feeling of not knowing. So therefore, when you give someone something, it has so much more value than it would have had if that person was being like proliferating. So say, for example, if Andrew does do an interview, it's a big deal. Whereas perhaps with other artists, they're doing loads of interviews and also like, I guess he sort of doesn't really need to, and he can pick and choose. And it must be quite challenging for him to be able to identify what's worth doing, because in terms of what interviews does he want to do? Is he just going to get asked the same stuff over and over? And also, I think a challenge for someone like Andrew is that he is famous. Okay. And my understanding of fame, having not been famous myself, but worked with people who are, is that if you've got any level of anxiety about how you're presented to the world, then it could be an absolute minefield, because you're then being filtered through other different systems. The thing that you said, regardless of how, I'm sure the fidelity by which that we're going to then present this is spot on. It's just you can't always be sure of that. You can't always be sure that you're going to be paraphrased or maybe misunderstood or maybe taken out of context. And when you're famous and you are the brand, you don't want to get cancelled because something that you said was misinterpreted. So maybe it's safer with someone on his level to just not do any interviews because of possible, maybe he's got PTSD about that happening in the past, or right. And so maybe there's just too much risk involved for whatever the inverted commas benefits might be. And a lot of artists, including myself, often get drawn towards the idea of doing interviews as it sort of plays on your vanity a bit of, wow, someone's interested in what I have to say. And that becomes, oh, wow, I definitely want to do it, rather than what's the grander plan here when it comes to the purpose of this? And I think he's able to separate that and go, well, the purpose of it is that I want to maybe do a select number of interviews where I really feel confident that the publication with whom I'm being associated is in line with my core values, and that there's as little risk as possible of being misrepresented. And I think from the offhand comments he's made there and then is that has happened, and not just the misrepresentation of possibly what he meant, but also people paraphrasing it in a way that made him sound inarticulate. And he's one of the most articulate people that I've ever met. So you can understand why he would want to preserve that.
Right. Absolutely makes complete sense. I did want to get into a couple of other areas with you. The first being Diamond Black, which is your group. And I know just in the last few days, you've launched your own podcast with that group. So let's start there. What's the latest with this podcast, and what can fans new and old expect from it?
Well, thanks so much for being so attentive to my other work. I really appreciate it, Joel. A lot of when I do a lot of these interviews, people haven't done the research, and I really appreciate that you have. So thank you. That was something that was an idea of Adam, our bassist and graphic designer, and our associate, Natalie, of creating something that we can consistently check in every week with our followers and keep building that following. It builds community for them. It builds consistent connection for them and us. And also it's a really good way for us to stay active and be conscious that, right, it's almost like every week we're having this check-in almost with our followers, and we kind of feel like we have to keep being motivated about, guys, we're doing this, or just staying mindful of being in communication with each other and thus having things to talk about, etc. So it sort of wins on every level. And from a kind of banned in 2024 perspective, I found that if you can like indirectly market your band, it's often much more effective than directly saying, hey guys, we've got a new single out, please listen to it. If instead you're building a connection and a community with your listeners and with your followers, that when you do release that song, they're hyped as for it as you are, rather than feeling they're being sort of sold to. It's in, hi guys, we've got a new song, please listen to it. They're vibed and excited about it because they feel that they have a connection with your music, because they have a connection with you as well. And that's, you know, a huge difference between Diamond Black and the Sisters of Mercy, is that Diamond Black are a band that are very much about having that very sort of direct connection with the fans, and rather than that sort of mystique that the Sisters have garnered over the years. So the podcast's great, and we're doing it every Sunday at 7 p.m. UK time. And kudos to Adam and Nat for figuring out all the tech behind how do you actually do that. And they essentially taught themselves how to do it so that we could do it. And the first one was great. It was really vibey, and definitely had, you know, things that we can improve, but progress, not perfection, has become our slogan as we move forward.
Absolutely. And I'll be sure in the video description to include relevant links for Diamond Black, and people can check out the podcast and of course check out the band.
Thank you.
We could probably do a separate interview just on that at some point.
Love to.
But I wanted to kind of conclude with your earlier mention regarding your 80s cover band you were performing with. Would that be Shot Through the Heart?
Correct. Yeah, good
Excellent.
research.
Well, I gotta tell you, the first video I saw of that band, you were covering Wasp.
Yeah.
First of all, fucking yes. It's fantastic. And I know you cover even, you know, I'm an old guy from New Jersey originally, and one of our bands that we really dug when we were younger was Taiketo, who, you know, they're kind of a regional thing, but you cover Taiketo, which I think is awesome. So you really do have an affinity for that era of music as well, which is fantastic. In light of all your other activities, how active is Shot Through the Heart these days?
Well, firstly, I really appreciate that you recognize that the sort of unique selling point of Shot Through the Heart, rather than many other sort of nostalgia 80s shows, was that we wanted to do a deep dive into the other bands. It wasn't simply Guns N' Roses, AC/DC, Motley Crue. It was Taiketo, DAD, Winger, Warrant, Hardline, like all these really great bands that had maybe a handful of albums, or sometimes even one album during that period, and then sort of got shelved for whatever reasons, but were arguably better than a lot of the bands who were more widely publicized. Like a band like Lynch Mob is just amazing, and yet they released 2 albums, and it's a bit more of a kind of deep cut for fans of the genre. Taiketo being another one. I believe there was only really that one main album in 1990, I think it was, that's got like Forever Young and Wings, 91, sorry, and Forever Young and Wings and stuff on it. And we were like, right, we love this music. I found a bunch of musicians on the scene who were very talented and really loved this stuff. Firehouse, Danger Danger, and and the idea of actually playing those songs with other keen, talented musicians to an audience was just mind-blowing. And there were really amazing moments when we were doing that, where we do it in a rehearsal, and one of the musicians would like come to me afterwards, almost like tears in the eyes, going, I can't believe we've just played that song. I love that song. I never thought I'd get a chance to play it. And that was sort of half the reason for doing it, was just fulfilling people's like love for music and bringing that joy. As a business model, it wasn't particularly good, because we really clung on to that slightly underground element to it. So we were only ever going to play venues and certainly not that many outside of London, to 200 to 300 people max a night. And that was a lot to do with people being, it's like, oh, it's a club, we'll go down, we like Guns N' Roses, and maybe there's some other songs that we'll know. But we did balance it really well. So we always made sure that we did it in 2 halves. I mean, the night was ridiculous. We did like 3 hours. And we would make it that we'd always like the first part of the set would be the deeper cut songs, and then part two, yeah, we'd go all out with like Def Leppard and Crew and Aerosmith and stuff. But even with those bands, we'd often choose songs that people weren't expecting. So we would do deep cuts from big bands as well, which was cool. But yeah, it wasn't a sustainable business model. It took so much time to prepare and rehearse these pretty difficult songs, these complicated songs. And for me to coordinate the whole thing, and we'd have guest musicians coming in to do like one or two songs, and there were spreadsheets, and it wasn't necessarily sustainable as a business model. And when I moved away from London just before the pandemic, that was sort of the last time that we did anything, because we recognized that in order to maintain the authenticity of it being quite a deep cut sort of process of these not just Sweet Child of Mine and Highway to Hell, that it wasn't necessarily going to land outside of a capital city. So I didn't feel that we would be able to sustainably tour the country playing those kind of songs that sort of was our USP, without going, okay, look, we're going to have to just do the obvious set tonight, which would possibly have taken some of the joy out of it. So yeah, but I'm intrigued to maybe know if it was something that could work if we ever did it in the States. And if so, what cities do you think it would have worked in?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I do a website as well, written work, and that's predominantly bands of that era, bands of that genre. So, the Stripers, the LA Guns, the Great Whites, I'm in the Dawkins, I'm in
Yeah.
touch with all those guys. And funny enough, they're American-based bands, but it seems that their greatest bread and butter is overseas. They have like the M3 festival in Maryland out here, where it's like 2 or 3 days of all those bands. They'll gather up like a dozen or so, and they'll do this big festival. But otherwise, they're playing 200 seaters in the States.
Yeah.
But Europe, the Watkins of the world, those guys will go out for 2 weeks, tour like kings, relive the old days, and then come back to the States, and they're doing what they do otherwise. So it's kind of funny. There are pockets of interest in the States, but you know, maybe LA might be interested for a bit, but the States are tough for that genre.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if uh if it was a regular thing in New York or LA, like a weekly thing, then you could get local musicians who are, genuinely from these bands to come and guest. Maybe that would be a cool way of doing it. But even the name of the night, Shot Through the Heart, was never connected to You Give Love a Bad Name. It was the Bon Jovi song Shot Through the Heart from the very
Right,
first album,
right.
which is one of my favorite Bon Jovi songs, because that particular era is a bit darker and heavier. And it was, I guess it was quite a retrospectively, that was quite a clever thing to call it, because we were grabbing onto the mainstream people because they recognized that as a big Bon Jovi song, but then also the undergrounders who could go, actually, I think you'll find it's from the first record. Yeah, it was, and that kind of summed up the whole night, that we catered to both of those demographics.
Mm. Yeah, man, it's excellent. I was digging what I saw online from that group. How could I not? My first concert was Bon Jovi. That stuff is as important to me as the sisters, as the other stuff. So it's nice to have a conversation that went this way. And as I said, you and I could probably do a 10-part series just talking about obscure 80s metal. But we'll have to do that another time.
Shame.
In the meantime, um, Ben, it's been a pleasure connecting with you. I've really enjoyed this.
Me too. Thank you again so much for making it work with the different times and everything. I really appreciate it. And I know you're busy. We all are. And yes, thank you very much.
It's my absolute pleasure, and I will see you in September.
Brilliant.
Take care.
You too.